Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Shock Point by April Henry. Narrated by Amy Mcfadden. Part 1. 1. April 14th. It was the rough hand over her mouth that convinced Cassie Strang that what was happening was real. That and the way the other man grabbed her legs. 5 minutes earlier, Cassie had gotten off the school bus and walked up the hill toward her house. A white van was parked in her driveway. She hadn't recognized the van. She barely recognized the house. After nearly 16 years of living in the same house, it was hard to get used to some place you had only lived in for 2 months. There was a squealing metal sound, like a door opening. Then hands grabbed her from behind. An enormous arm wrapped itself around her neck like a boa constrictor. She swung her open backpack up and behind her and heard the man grunt as it connected. A pen bounced off Cassie's head and a book struck her shoulder. The man tore the backpack from her and flung it on the ground, then pulled her tighter against his fat belly. Cassie started to scream, but then his hand was over her mouth, stifling her, pressing so hard that she felt the bridge of her nose shift. This couldn't be happening to her. Cassie managed to catch a tiny fold of skin between her front teeth. She nipped it, hard. A curse word hissed in her ear. The hand loosened for a second. She smelled fried food when she took a shuddery, frantic breath, but then the hand was clamped down again. Harder. No air! No air! Another man ran in front of her and grabbed her ankles, easily swinging her up into the air. He was short and solid, with a dyed black mullet. "She's a sassy one," he said, and grinned. He was still grinning when Cassie kicked him in the face. Her shoe flew off her foot. Dropping one of Cassie's legs, he clamped a hand across his nose, which was now spurting blood. The hand across her mouth loosened. Cassie dragged another breath into her lungs, then let it out in a scream. It wasn't as loud as she had hoped. There hadn't been enough air behind it. But surely her mother must have heard, or the neighbors then. One of them might be dialing 911 right now. The men grabbed her again, no nonsense now. The mullet-haired man lifted her other ankle and caught them both under his arm. The man behind her, the one she couldn't see, clamped his hand over her mouth again. Holding her between them like a rolled-up carpet, the men began to maneuver her around to the back of the van. The doors were now open. Metal bars divided the front bench seat from the empty back. The floor was bare except for a rubber mat and a white 5-gallon plastic bucket. An iron bar was bolted on one wall, and from it hung a 2-foot-long loop of chain fastened with a metal lock. The guy holding her legs grunted as he tried to step back and up into the van. Cassie started thrashing even harder, hoping to throw him off balance. If she could just get her feet under her. She heard the front door bang open. Hope bloomed in her. Her mom. Cassie imagined Jackie with the phone in one hand and her stepfather Rick's gun in the other. That must have been what had taken her so long, unlocking the gun from its safe. Her mom ran around the corner. No phone, no gun. Instead, she held a suitcase in one hand. The other clutched a brochure with a starfish on the front to her swollen belly. Cassie almost didn't recognize Jackie. Her eyes were slits, red and swollen. Had they beaten her? Had they hurt the baby? Was her mom being kidnapped too? She arched her back even more frantically, managed to get her mouth free. "Mom! Mom! Help me! Mom!" Her mom looked at Cassie, then away. Something was terribly wrong. Cassie felt like she had stepped out into the air, never noticing the staircase beneath her feet. The feeling of beginning to fall. Behind her, cold metal clicked onto her wrists, so tight that it pinched her skin. Handcuffs. The The man with the mullet let her feet go, and she fell against the man behind her. In a strangled voice, Jackie spoke to the two men. "Wait, I don't know if this is right. Do you have to manhandle her like that?" The man with his arm looped around Cassie's neck spoke.
"They're tricky at this stage, ma'am. You can't ask them to come along quietly, because they won't. They will lie and manipulate until they've got you believing that what's up is down and what's black is white."
"Mom, what's happening?" Cassie asked in a choked whisper. "What's happening to me?" "It's for the best, Cassie. They're going to help you." Jackie's drawn-in breath was like a sob. "What? Mom! What are they doing? Why are you letting them take me?" The man behind Cassie gave her shoulder a little shove.
"Okay, ma'am, we need to get this show on the road."
Cassie took one step, two, not resisting. Her mother handed the other one the suitcase, and he threw it into the back of the van. He picked Cassie's shoe up off the lawn and threw that in, too. She heard the front door open again and looked over to see Rick coming out of the house. He came down the steps and put his arm around her mother.
"That's right, Cassie. Just go along with these gentlemen. They're going to help you with your problems."
"I don't have any problems," she yelled. "It's you who has the problem."
"Cassie, I found the crystal meth in your room. Don't try to lie."
Shock stiffened her spine. "What are you talking about? I don't use drugs." She appealed to her mom. "I don't! How can you even think that?" But instead of turning to her, her mother looked up at Rick, her brows knitting together.
"Be strong, Jackie. Would you rather see Cassie in jail or dead? This is her only hope."
The man behind Cassie shoved her. She sprawled onto the floor of the van, vainly trying to jerk her handcuffed arms forward to break her fall. Rough hands dragged Cassie forward and turned her so that she was sitting. They unlocked the chain and slid it through her handcuffs, then clicked it closed again. She only had eyes for her mother. Surely Jackie couldn't allow this to happen. Surely she would know whom to believe. Instead of looking at Cassie, her mom pressed her face into Rick's neck. Absently, he patted her back, but his eyes didn't move. The last thing Cassie saw before the van doors slammed closed was her stepfather's cold stare. 2. 3 days earlier, April 11th.
"Sure you don't want some roast beef?"
Rick asked, holding aloft a slice. A drop of bloody juice landed on the white platter. "Gross," Cassie said, pushing away her plate, even though she hadn't finished her mashed potatoes and salad. "If he's going to harass me, can I be excused?" "Cassie!" Jackie said. "Well, it's true. He knows I don't eat meat, but he still keeps asking." Rick looked hurt.
"I'm just worried that you're not getting enough iron. A girl your age has to worry about that, as well as the fact that not eating meat means you're not getting enough riboflavin. And there are 20 necessary amino acids, and you probably are only getting a fraction of them."
As a psychiatrist, Rick had gone to medical school and liked to show off his knowledge, even if it was 25 years old. "She eats cheese," Jackie said, looking back and forth between them. "And eggs, and she takes a multivitamin. I can check to make sure it has iron in it."
"I've been thinking maybe we should add something else for her health," Rick said. "SOCOM."
Cassie couldn't believe Rick thought she needed SOCOM. He specialized in treating what were known as troubled teens. He had enrolled many of his patients in a clinical trial for SOCOM and had been amazed by the results. When the company had given him an opportunity to invest in it, he had jumped at the chance. Jackie sat back in her chair, shaking her head. "I just don't think it's natural to put Cassie on something to change her moods."
"Natural?"
Rick echoed.
What's natural? If everything was natural, we would be naked, running around on our knuckles, and eating raw roots.
It was already clear that Rick wasn't a big believer in nature. He had his hair colored at a salon, his teeth were dazzlingly white, and just last month he had undergone LASIK so that he could do away with his glasses. No matter what he did, though, Cassie thought he couldn't hide the fact that he was old, at least 50, and short.
Besides, SOCOM changes kids' lives, Jackie. You've seen for yourself what a difference it makes.
Her mom looked down at her plate. Her voice was soft. You're right. It did help them. But Cassie's not really to the point that we need to put her on a drug.
But SOCOM's not a drug. It's an organically occurring peptide some people are deficient in. You wouldn't deny a diabetic insulin just because it wasn't natural, would you?
He leaned forward, gesturing with his fork.
It's the same with SOCOM. It's not much different than a multivitamin.
But you told me there had been some problems with it.
A frown crossed Rick's face. A few patients have been refractory, but we're already working on fine-tuning that by taking out the right-handed molecules. And that issue only affects a tiny percentage. For everyone else, SOCOM is making a huge difference. SOCOM gives kids the piece they're missing, Jackie. It makes them whole again.
Her mom held firm. Cassie's just adjusting, that's all. She doesn't have the kinds of problems as the kids you see in your practice. It's a big change for her, us getting married and then moving to Portland and the baby coming. Give her a little time and she'll be fine. You'll see. But after dinner, Jackie came to Cassie's room and begged her to try to be more cheerful around Rick. I know it's hard, she said. With a sigh, she sat down on the edge of Cassie's bed. There were dark circles under her eyes. The doctor had told her she had to take it easy, otherwise the baby might come too early. From the side, her mom looked misshapen. Her breasts were swollen, her belly was swollen, and even her feet, tucked into stretchy black sandals, were swollen. Although they had never talked about the exact due date, it was clear to Cassie that Jackie must already have been pregnant when she and Rick got married. Rick really loves you, but because of his work, he jumps to conclusions. Every day he sees kids who use drugs, who get pregnant, who drop out of school, and he worries you could end up like them. He's only trying to help. But I'm not like that, Cassie said. You know that. Her mom sighed and ran her hands through her hair, tucking the strands of her bangs behind her ears. She had short, dark, curly hair, the same as Cassie's. But lately, you seem to go out of your way to aggravate him. You've changed so much, Cassie. You never acted like this before. That's only because he's always telling me stuff, but he never listens. I thought that's what therapists did. Listen. Her mom toyed with the giant diamond ring on her left hand, turning it around so that it looked like a plain gold wedding band. But you're not helping, Cassie. The more you talk back, the more you roll your eyes or use that sarcastic tone of voice, the harder he comes down on you. And it just leaves me feeling stuck in the middle. I'll try, Cassie told her mom. Even to her own ears, it didn't sound convincing. She stayed in her room until Rick and Jackie went out for ice cream. Rick allowed Jackie a daily kid-size cone, as long as she otherwise stuck to the strict diet he had devised. As far as Rick was concerned, this baby was going to be perfect. As soon as Cassie heard his BMW pull out of the garage, she went downstairs to the kitchen and turned on the computer. But instead of starting up, a question mark began to blink in the middle of the otherwise gray screen. Cassie didn't know what it meant, but it couldn't be good. She shut the computer off and turned it on again. The same question mark appeared. The third time, the screen stayed black. Great. Her history paper was due tomorrow, and here it was, 8:17 p.m., and she didn't even have a way to start it. The library closed in less than an hour, and the last time she had been there, all the internet terminals had been taken. Besides, Cassie only had an instructional license and couldn't drive on her own. She had figured she could cobble this paper together, do a keyword search on Google, snip a bit here, a bit there, and stitch it together with a few sentences of her own. Good enough for a C, maybe a B-. A year ago, she would have worked on the paper for weeks, would have gotten an A. But a year ago, her mother hadn't been married to Rick, hadn't even been dating him. A year ago, Dr. Rick Wheeler had been Jackie's boss, and Jackie certainly hadn't been pregnant by him, which was so gross. Her mom was 39, way too old to be having a baby. Everything had changed, but as far as her mom was concerned, Cassie was still supposed to be the same quiet little girl who got straight A's. And both Jackie and Rick would really be mad if Cassie got a D for turning the paper in late. Her stepfather had already had several talks with her about her lack of motivation. Now, as Cassie stared at the blank computer screen, she thought about how one more bad grade might be all it took to get her mom to agree with Rick that she needed SOCOM to change her attitude and help her focus. Cassie had better figure out a way to get this paper done, and fast. Should she call that guy, Thatcher Hendrick, from school? He had told her he worked part-time at a computer store. She knew Thatcher a little better than most of the other kids because they had both spent a few hours after school each week working together on the yearbook. He looked kind of scary, with a pierced eyebrow and shoulder-length hair dyed dead black. But a few weeks ago, he had told Cassie he wanted to be a doctor because his older sister had died of cancer. He said it offhand, like it was no big deal, but his eyes had blinked several times. Maybe Thatcher could fix the computer. Except, what would her mom and Rick think if they came home and found her alone with a boy, even if it was just in the kitchen? Besides, there wasn't time to call him. Rick's computer. Cassie looked over her shoulder as if someone was watching her, which was silly. She was completely alone. But Rick had emphasized that no one was ever to go into his office. All his patient records were kept there, and he said the government had new strict laws about confidentiality. Cassie looked at the digital clock on the stainless steel range. She had maybe a half hour before they would be home. She went down the hall, took a deep breath, and opened the door to Rick's office. 3. April 14th. She wasn't going to let them hear her cry. Cassie promised herself that as she sat on the cold rubber mat in the back of the van. The one whose nose she had broken, at least she hoped she had broken it, was half turned in his seat, smirking at her through the bars. To gain privacy, she dropped her chin onto her chest, let her bangs cover her eyes, and turned as far away from him as the handcuffs would allow. Her chest ached as if someone had torn out her heart. She still couldn't believe her mother had done this. For 7 years, Cassie and Jackie had been on their own. "It's just us against the world, kid," her mom used to say. After Cassie's dad had moved out to be with his new girlfriend, who later became his wife, Cassie had brought all her stuffed animals to her parents' queen-size bed. For the next year, she slept next to her mother. During the day, they never talked about the nights, about how her mom had nightmares and Cassie would wake her up because she was screaming. Or, worse, sobbing so hard it sounded like something was ripping inside her. "Better stop your bawling and get used to the new reality," the guy with the bloody nose said now. Cassie had thought she was keeping her tears a secret, but he must have seen them anyway. Out of the corner of her eye, Cassie watched as he pinched the end of his nose and then examined his fingertips. He looked over at her again, his mouth twisted and ugly. "You really messed up my nose. I can't breathe right anymore." "Oh, come on, JJ. Your nose has been broken before." the fat one said. He had tattoos all up and down his arms, colorful ones that must have taken hours and hours.
"You're just mad that this time it's a girl."
"Yeah, and now she's crying just like a girl." JJ turned back to her. "Don't you get it? Your parents don't want you. Looks like your mom has a new baby on the way. You know how much people like babies. A lot more than they do kids who do drugs." "Rick's not my father, and I don't do drugs." It was stupid to appeal to them. Still, Cassie couldn't help herself. JJ just laughed. "All right, that's a new one. Marty and I will have to remember that one." Marty acted as if he hadn't heard Cassie at all.
"Once you start taking drugs, you lose all self-respect. Next thing you know, you're tricking yourself on the street, driving off with some man old enough to be your daddy."
Cassie dropped her head again. How could her mom have abandoned her like this? How could her mom have believed Rick? Jackie must know that Cassie didn't use drugs. But Rick had so many horror stories about teens gone bad, runaways who didn't come back, kids who tried heroin once and were addicts for life, who started hanging out with the wrong friends and somehow ended up living at the bus station. Rick must have scared Jackie into doing this. He'd brought them to Portland, cut them off from all their old friends, and then had gone to work on Jackie so it could be just the two of them and the baby in her mom's belly. And now it seemed he had backed up his lies by planting drugs in Cassie's room. She had to get free and find someone who would listen to her. Cassie shifted on the floor, which wasn't softened at all by the rubber mat. When she did, she became aware of something hard in the right pocket of her jeans. Her cell phone. It was one of the tiniest models, bought by her mom as a major bribe for moving to Portland. The two guys hadn't had time to search her before they hustled her into the van. But what good would the phone do her? With her hands behind her back, she couldn't even get it out of her pocket. And who would Cassie call, anyway? It would take too long to explain things to her dad. Thatcher knew what was happening, so he would catch on a lot quicker, but how much could a 16-year-old do? The best bet would be 911, Cassie decided. But first, Cassie had to figure out how to get her hands on the phone and a little bit of privacy. And soon, before they got to where they were going. Then the chances of them searching her would go way up. The thought of their hands on her made Cassie feel like throwing up. She swallowed hard, hearing her mom's voice in her head. "Don't go borrowing trouble. One thing at a time." And the first thing was the phone. She shifted so that her hands were hidden from view, then pretended to stretch her shoulders. Instead, she tested the handcuffs by quickly jerking her wrists apart. They didn't budge. Ignoring the shooting pains that resulted, Cassie wiggled her sluggish fingers. Ideally, she needed a place where she could be by herself, unobserved, for a few minutes. But how was she going to manage that? Then she had an idea. "I have to go to the bathroom," Cassie said. 4. April 11th. Everything in Rick's office was so neat. She would have to be sure not to leave any trace. While Cassie waited for the computer to boot, she spun around in his leather chair. Only the best for Rick. She looked at his filing cabinets and thought about how he had begun to treat her like a potential patient. She wouldn't put it past him to have started a file on her. Opening the top filing cabinet, Cassie looked at the tabs. Adams, Elizabeth. Bowers, Jeremy. Candlewick, Samantha. She recognized several of the names as being kids from Minor, but she didn't really know them. They were all older or younger than Cassie. Some of them were already out of high school. She was about to close the filing cabinet and go to the next one, where Strang Cassie might be. Then she saw a name that made her stop. Cartwright. Darren. She hadn't realized Darren had been Rick's patient. Of course, it wasn't like Rick was going to talk about it, especially after what had happened. Darren had had black-framed glasses and thick brown hair that stuck up like an animal's pelt. Tall enough to play basketball, he was too awkward to dribble a ball, let alone make a basket. He had been in honors English and math with Cassie, but they had never really talked. Later, after everything happened, she realized he didn't really have any friends. Nobody had paid much attention to him until he leapt off the tallest building in Minor. The mailman who saw him said Darren seemed to think he could fly. He was still flapping his arms when the pavement rose up to meet him. In the weeks just before his death, Darren had changed. In class, he started whispering to himself, so low that only the people nearest him could hear it. Cassie had asked him, "What?" a couple of times, but when it was clear he hadn't been addressing her, she tried to block it out. Death made Darren someone special, romantic. A lot of people went to his funeral, cried, and hung on to each other. Candles appeared on the sidewalk, still stained with his blood, and bouquets wrapped in clear plastic, and sometimes an open can of beer, although Cassie had never heard that Darren drank. People talked about him far more than they ever had when he was alive. Cassie surrendered to temptation and slipped out Darren's file. It was surprisingly thin. On top was a sheet labeled, "SOCOM Informed Consent." So Darren had been on SOCOM? Obviously it hadn't worked. The next few pages were written in Rick's distinctive handwriting, which slanted to the left, sharp, narrow letters, all uppercase. Her eye was drawn to an entry dated October 3rd. Has been responding well to SOCOM, moods more stable, mother reports he is more obedient. She turned the pages, looked at the last entry. Patient claims that he can become a bird and has flown over his school. Last SOCOM injection 10 days ago. Drug side effects are worrisome. Cassie looked at the date. October 29th, 3 days before Darren died. She remembered because Darren had killed himself the day after Halloween. She wasn't sure what the entry meant. If SOCOM was so good, why had Rick been worried about Darren being on it? On a hunch, she looked more closely at the names in the filing cabinets. 2 more of them sounded familiar. Ben Tranbarger had gone to Cassie's high school too, but had been a senior. Carmen Hernandez had dropped out in 9th grade. Ben had drunk Silver Cleaner. Carmen stabbed herself in the abdomen. The newspaper interviewed experts who cautioned that media attention could prompt copycat suicides. One story said that after Ben killed himself, his mom found a clipping about Darren's death on top of his dresser. Maybe it was copycatting, or maybe it was only a coincidence. Crazy people went to therapy. At least that was how it was supposed to work. Even so, doctors couldn't fix everything. But when Cassie opened the 2 files, she saw that both Ben and Carmen had been on SOCOM. And, just like in Darren's file, Rick had notes about how they were starting to become delusional, and that he was taking them off SOCOM. Cassie needed to show these files to someone, but if she took them and he found out, well, she didn't even want to think about how angry her stepfather would be. If only Rick had a photocopier. Then Cassie thought of her digital camera, the one Rick had bought her to try to soften the move. She had already had a camera, a Minolta her father had given her for her 14th birthday. The new camera had intrigued her, even if it seemed too easy. No film to buy, no f-stops to fiddle with. Just point and shoot, Rick had told her. She looked at her watch. 8:44. How long did she have until they came back from Baskin-Robbins? She ran upstairs and snatched up the camera from her desk. As she steadily turned the pages and pressed the camera's button, Cassie tried to reason with herself. Minor was a small town. Rick had been one of just 2 therapists who specialized in adolescents. It probably was just a coincidence that he had been the one who had treated these 3 teenagers. She jumped when she heard the garage door whine. Cassie wasn't done, but she hurriedly closed the files, slid them back in the right places, turned off the light, and slipped out of the office. By the time her mom and Rick came in...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?